The afternoon was calm and ordinary, the kind of quiet day when the city seemed to slow down just a little. Inside a small cafe on the corner of a busy street, the soft sound of coffee machines hummed in the background while gentle music floated through the air. A few customers sat at scattered tables, some working on laptops, others chatting quietly over warm cups of coffee. The smell of roasted beans and fresh pastries filled the room, creating a comfortable space where people could forget about the rush outside. Through the wide glass windows, sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, painting warm patterns that slowly shifted as the clouds moved across the sky. Nothing about the moment suggested that anything unusual was about to happen. The cafe staff moved calmly between tables, wiping counters, serving drinks, and greeting customers with polite smiles. It was just another normal afternoon in a place where strangers came and went without much notice. Then, outside the cafe, a sleek black car slowly pulled up to the curb. Its polished surface reflected the sunlight, catching the attention of a few people near the window. The engine stopped, and for a moment the car simply sat there, quiet and still against the noise of passing traffic. A man stepped out from the driver's side. His suit was perfectly tailored, sharp and expensive, the kind that suggested power and success without needing to say a word. His movements were calm and controlled, the way someone carries themselves after years of being respected, maybe even feared, in business and social circles. People who noticed him might not have known his name, but they could tell he was someone important. There was a quiet authority in the way he walked, the kind that often surrounds people who have spent their lives building wealth and influence. After closing the car door, he walked to the other side and gently opened the passenger door. From the seat stepped a young girl, no older than 8 or 9. She was small beside him, dressed neatly in a simple but elegant outfit that showed the same quiet wealth as her father's appearance. Her eyes were curious, moving slowly across the street as if she were studying every little detail around her. The man reached out his hand, and she placed her small fingers into his palm without hesitation. The gesture felt natural, practiced, as if it had been repeated many times before. Together they stood for a moment beside the car, the tall figure of the father and the smaller, delicate presence of the daughter, creating a quiet contrast against the busy sidewalk. People walked past them without much thought, too busy with their own lives to notice the small story unfolding beside the cafe entrance. The man glanced toward the cafe door, then down at the girl with a look that softened his otherwise serious face. Without speaking, he gently guided her toward the entrance. The bell above the cafe door rang softly as they stepped inside. A few customers lifted their eyes for a second, curious about the new arrivals, before returning to their drinks and conversations. The millionaire paused briefly near the entrance, scanning the room as if choosing the right place to sit. His presence carried a quiet weight that subtly changed the atmosphere around him, though most people could not explain why. The girl stood patiently beside him, her hand still resting in his. Her eyes moved across the cafe with calm interest, observing the people, the tables, the warm lights, and the shelves filled with cups and coffee jars. Finally, the man guided her toward a table near the window where sunlight touched the wooden surface. Chairs scraped softly as they pulled them out and sat down. From the outside, anyone looking through the window would simply see a well-dressed father sharing a quiet afternoon with his daughter, another small moment in the endless flow of everyday life passing through the cafe. Doors, the young girl, sat quietly across from her father, her small hands resting gently on the wooden table. The sunlight from the window beside them touched her face, highlighting the calm expression in her eyes as she looked around the cafe. She watched people carefully, studying the way they spoke, laughed, and shared stories with one another. For most of the customers, conversation flowed easily. Words moved freely between friends, couples, and strangers who met briefly over coffee. But for the girl, that world of sound and speech had always been distant, something she could observe but never truly join. She had never spoken a single word in her life. Since the day she was born, silence had been her constant companion. Doctors had explained it many times in complicated terms, but the simple truth was clear: She could not speak the way other children could. Her voice, the one most people take for granted, had never come. Because of that, communication had always been difficult for her. At school, many children didn't know how to interact with someone who could not answer them with words. Some tried at first, asking simple questions or inviting her to play, but confusion often followed when she responded only with gestures or expressions. Over time, many simply stopped trying. Teachers did their best, but even they sometimes struggled to understand what she was trying to say. The girl learned early that silence could make the world feel lonely, even when surrounded by people. Her thoughts were full, her feelings strong, her curiosity endless, yet expressing them was never simple. Instead of words, she relied on small movements, gentle signs she had slowly learned, and the language of her eyes. When she wanted something, she pointed carefully. When she felt happy, her smile brightened her whole face. When she felt uncertain or nervous, her fingers would twist together quietly in her lap. Her father had spent years learning to understand those silent messages. At first it had been confusing for him too. A man used to negotiations, meetings, and powerful conversations in business suddenly faced a challenge that money and influence could not easily solve. He had built companies, closed deals worth millions, and spoken confidently in front of large audiences. Yet the most important conversation in his life often happened without a single word. Over time, he began to notice the smallest details about his daughter. The way her eyes widened when she was excited. The way she gently tugged at his sleeve when she wanted his attention. The way she tapped the table lightly when she was thinking or observing something interesting. Slowly, their own quiet system of understanding began to grow. Still, outside their home, the world was not always patient with silence. In restaurants, waiters sometimes spoke directly to the father, assuming the girl would not respond anyway. In stores, clerks asked questions she could not answer. Even simple activities could become uncomfortable moments where people did not know how to react. The girl had grown used to watching conversations rather than joining them. She could see the rhythm of speech in people's lips and the emotions in their voices, but she could only imagine what it felt like to respond the same way. Despite this, her curiosity about the world never faded. Her eyes moved across the cafe now, carefully studying everything around her. She noticed the barista pouring milk into a cup, the couple by the door sharing a quiet laugh, and the student typing quickly on a laptop in the corner. Every movement told a small story she tried to understand. Though she could not speak, her mind was always active, always searching for meaning in the expressions and gestures of others. Her father watched her from across the table, familiar with the quiet way she explored her surroundings. He knew the silence she lived with every day was not empty. It was full of thoughts she could not easily share with the rest of the world. For the girl, every new place came with the same quiet challenge of communication, a silent barrier standing between her and the voices filling the room. The cafe continued its calm rhythm as customers talked quietly, and the sound of cups touching saucers echoed softly from the counter. Behind the service area, staff members moved with practiced ease, preparing drinks, carrying plates, and greeting guests with polite smiles. Among them was a waitress who had been working steadily since the start of her shift. She moved between tables with a quiet confidence that came from experience. Her uniform was simple and neat, and she carried a small notepad in her hand as she checked on customers and took orders. Her presence was calm but warm, the kind that made people feel comfortable without needing much effort. She noticed the new pair sitting by the window almost immediately. It was part of her job to observe the room, to make sure every customer felt welcomed and attended to. The well-dressed man and the young girl stood out slightly among the usual afternoon visitors. The man's expensive suit and composed posture suggested someone used to authority, someone who likely spent his days in boardrooms rather than small neighborhood cafes. The girl beside him looked quiet and thoughtful, her small frame sitting neatly in the chair as she looked around the room with curious eyes. The waitress paused briefly near the counter, watching them for a moment as she organized a tray of cups. There was something gentle about the way the father and daughter sat together. The man leaned slightly forward, paying attention to the girl even though neither of them spoke. The girl seemed calm but observant, carefully studying the surroundings as if she were trying to understand every detail of the place. The waitress had seen many types of customers during her time working there. Some were impatient and demanding, some friendly and talkative, others quiet and reserved. Part of her job was learning how to approach each person in the way that made them feel comfortable. She picked up a menu and smoothed the front of her apron before stepping away from the counter. Her steps were steady as she walked across the cafe floor toward the table by the window. As she approached, the warm light from the glass reflected softly around the table where the father and daughter sat. The man noticed her first and lifted his eyes briefly in acknowledgement. His expression remained composed, but there was a slight softness when he glanced toward his daughter. The waitress greeted them with the same polite professionalism she showed every guest. Her voice was calm and friendly as she introduced herself and offered the menus. She placed them gently on the table so both the father and the girl could see them clearly. The girl looked at the menu for a moment, her fingers lightly touching the edge of the paper while her eyes scanned the pictures and words printed across the page. The waitress noticed the girl's quiet attention and gave her a small, kind smile. She was used to reading small signals from customers, noticing when someone felt shy, uncertain, or simply needed a little patience. Her expression carried a warmth that made the cafe feel a little more welcoming. The father nodded politely as the waitress stood beside the table. His posture remained straight, his presence still carrying the calm authority that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Yet there was also a hint of protectiveness in the way he sat beside the girl, as if he was quietly making sure she felt comfortable in the unfamiliar place. The waitress waited a moment, giving them time to look over the menu. Around them, the cafe continued its soft background rhythm of conversations and clinking cups. The air still carried the comforting smell of fresh coffee and baked bread from the kitchen. From the outside, it looked like a completely normal interaction between a waitress and two customers enjoying a quiet afternoon break. The waitress stood beside the table with a patient smile, waiting for the father and daughter to finish looking at the menu. The quiet hum of the cafe continued around them, filled with soft conversations and the gentle sounds of cups being placed on tables. Sunlight from the window created a warm glow over the small space where the two customers sat. The father looked down at the menu briefly, then lifted his eyes toward the waitress as if preparing to place the order. Before he could speak, the waitress's attention shifted to the girl. She had noticed the way the child studied the menu with careful focus, her fingers resting lightly on the page. There was something thoughtful in the girl's eyes, something observant and patient. The waitress tilted her head slightly, her expression calm and kind. Instead of speaking right away, she paused for a brief moment. Then she did something unexpected. She gently raised her hands in front of her. Her fingers moved slowly at first, forming clear and deliberate shapes in the air. The motion was smooth and confident, as if it were a language she had used many times before. The father watched with mild curiosity, not immediately understanding what she was doing. But the girl noticed instantly. Her eyes widened with sudden recognition as the waitress continued moving her hands in graceful patterns. The gestures were not random movements. They carried meaning, structure, and intention. The waitress was communicating through sign language. Her hands moved with quiet precision as she greeted the girl and asked a simple question about what she might like to order. The movements were gentle and easy to follow, each sign flowing naturally into the next. For a moment, the space between them seemed to fill with a new kind of conversation, one that did not rely on spoken words. The girl stared at the waitress, almost as if she were making sure she had seen correctly. In most places, people spoke to her father instead, assuming she would not understand or respond. Few strangers ever tried to communicate directly with her in a language she knew. But now, right in front of her, someone was speaking in the quiet language she used every day. The waitress continued signing with the same calm rhythm, her face warm and encouraging. She asked the girl if she liked chocolate milk or juice and pointed gently to a few items on the menu to make the choice easier. The girl's expression slowly shifted from surprise to excitement. Her fingers lifted slightly from the table as if she wanted to respond, but needed a second to process the moment. The father remained still in his chair, watching the interaction unfold. At first he seemed confused, unsure of what exactly was happening. His eyes moved from the waitress's hands to his daughter's face as he tried to understand the silent exchange taking place right in front of him. Around them, the cafe continued its ordinary afternoon pace. Customers chatted, coffee machines hissed softly, and chairs scraped gently against the floor as people moved about. Yet at the small table near the window, something different was happening. The waitress's hands continued to move with steady confidence, forming clear signs that carried the warmth of a genuine greeting. Her gestures showed patience and care, as if she wanted the girl to feel completely comfortable. She leaned slightly forward, making sure the girl could see every movement clearly. The silent conversation between them had begun to form its own rhythm, one that existed quietly within the noise of the cafe, but was understood perfectly by the two people sharing it. For a brief moment after the waitress finished her first signs, the girl simply stared at her. Her eyes were wide with surprise, almost as if she were afraid the moment might disappear if she moved too quickly. The waitress stood patiently, her hands relaxed but ready, her warm expression encouraging the girl to respond. Around them, the cafe continued with its usual sounds and movement, but at the small table near the window the world seemed to slow down. The girl's fingers slowly lifted from the table. At first, the movement was careful and slightly hesitant, like someone testing whether something was real. Then, with growing confidence, she began to move her hands. Her small fingers formed clear shapes in the air, answering the waitress in the same silent language. It had been a long time since she had been able to speak to a stranger this way. Her hands moved gently at first, but as she realized the waitress understood her perfectly, the movements became faster and more expressive. The waitress watched closely, nodding with understanding as she followed the girl's signs. A smile spread across her face, the kind of genuine smile that appears when two people truly understand each other. The girl's entire expression changed in that moment. The quiet seriousness she had carried earlier softened into excitement. Her eyes lit up with a bright energy that had been hidden behind her usual calm silence. She signed again, this time a little more quickly, asking a small question about the drinks on the menu. The waitress answered immediately with clear and friendly signs, explaining the options while pointing gently toward the pictures on the menu. For the girl, the experience felt completely different from most of her interactions outside home. Usually people spoke around her rather than with her. They directed questions to her father or simply assumed communication would be too difficult. But here, someone was speaking directly to her in a language she understood without effort. Her shoulders relaxed, and she leaned forward slightly in her chair, eager to continue the conversation. She signed that she liked chocolate milk and also asked if the cafe had cookies. The waitress nodded with a small laugh and responded that they did, pointing toward the display counter where fresh pastries were arranged neatly behind glass. The girl followed the direction with her eyes, spotting the cookies almost instantly. Her face brightened even more, and she signed her choice with an enthusiastic movement of her hands. The exchange between them grew more natural with every moment. The girl's earlier hesitation disappeared as she realized she no longer had to struggle to express herself. Her hands moved freely now, sharing simple thoughts and questions as easily as spoken conversation. Even small things seemed to bring her joy, like being asked what she wanted instead of having someone decide for her. The waitress continued responding with the same patience and clarity, making sure every sign was easy to follow. She leaned slightly closer when needed and maintained eye contact, so the girl could read both her hands and her expressions. For people who use sign language, facial expressions and gestures are just as important as the movements of the fingers, and the waitress communicated with the full warmth of both. Anyone watching closely might have noticed how the girl's energy had completely transformed. The quiet observer who had been studying the cafe just minutes earlier was now actively part of a conversation. Her excitement showed in the quick movements of her hands and the brightness in her eyes. For the first time since entering the cafe, She was not simply watching the world around her. She was finally able to join it across the table. The father sat quietly as the interaction unfolded in front of him. At first, he had only been watching casually, assuming the waitress was simply helping them choose something from the menu. But as the silent conversation continued between the waitress and his daughter, his attention slowly sharpened. His eyes followed every movement of their hands, every small expression on his daughter's face. For a moment, he seemed almost frozen in place, as if he were trying to fully understand what he was seeing. The waitress's hands moved with calm confidence, forming clear signs that flowed naturally from one to another. His daughter responded just as easily, her fingers moving quickly as she answered questions and made small requests. The exchange was smooth, comfortable, and completely natural. Yet for the father, it felt unexpected, almost unbelievable. He had spent years navigating the challenges that came with raising a child who could not speak. From doctor visits to specialized classes, he had done everything he could to help her communicate with the world. He had learned the basics of sign language himself, so he could understand her thoughts at home. But outside their private space, moments like this were rare. Most people simply did not know how to communicate with her. In restaurants, waiters usually spoke directly to him. They asked him what she wanted, assuming she would not be able to answer for herself. Even when he tried to explain, the interaction often became awkward or uncomfortable. Over time, he had grown used to stepping in and speaking on her behalf. It had become a quiet routine, one that always left a small weight in his chest because he knew his daughter had so much more to say than the world ever heard. Now, sitting in the cafe, he watched something completely different happen right in front of him. The waitress was not speaking to him at all. Her attention was focused entirely on his daughter. She asked questions directly to the girl and waited patiently for her answers. The father noticed how comfortable his daughter seemed, how naturally the conversation flowed between them. He had seen his daughter use sign language many times before, but rarely with someone she had just met. There was a kind of freedom in her movements now, a confidence that appeared whenever she realized someone truly understood her. The father's serious expression softened as he watched her. A quiet emotion moved through him, something deeper than simple surprise. He noticed the brightness in her eyes and the small smile that appeared each time the waitress responded to her signs. It was the kind of happiness that comes when a barrier suddenly disappears, even if only for a moment. He realized that for his daughter, this simple exchange meant much more than ordering a drink or choosing a cookie. It was the rare feeling of being heard without needing someone else to translate her thoughts. His mind moved back through memories of the many times she had been overlooked in public places. Moments when people spoke around her as if she were invisible, or when conversations ended quickly because communication felt too complicated. Each of those memories quietly contrasted with what he was witnessing now. The father leaned back slightly in his chair, still watching the conversation continue. His daughter's hands moved quickly as she shared another small comment, and the waitress answered with the same warm attention. The entire scene was simple and ordinary to anyone else in the cafe, but to him it carried a weight he could not ignore. In that small moment by the window, he was seeing something he had rarely seen before, his daughter connecting with the world on her own terms.